All right, we were sharing some blessings because we are going to be looking at this section where it just starts off and then over and over it talks about blessed are those. We're going through the book of Matthew for the simple reason that it's the first book of the New Testament, and so it's really God's first words to Christians. And we come to this section that is one of the best-known sections in Matthew and really the whole Bible. You know, people who don't know much about the Bible, they've heard of this section here. And it starts in chapter 5, verse 1. It says, "Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them." So these crowds that had gathered from the work they'd been doing, and we saw in the last chapter, and specifically it says his focus is on the disciples, people that have made a commitment to him already. He teaches them, everyone else is there as well, and you certainly see that there are others who will come to be disciples as a result of this time. What this is commonly known as is the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a new section. You can tell there's a definite break between chapter 4 and chapter 5. It changes to this, but at the same time, it follows. And so there is a connection there, and it makes you ask the question, how do they fit together? You know, how does this section follow from, how did the other section lead into this, and what's the connection? And I see a progression here. And we've gone over it a few times, but I think it's important. You go back to chapter 1, and it's God's plan and our part. You know, God's ultimate plan to send Jesus to restore our relationship with him, and really everything other plan God has is part of that. Well, it also shows us that we've got a part in that. We're not just, sitting back as passive recipients. We're active participants. Joseph was, all the people in the Old Testament were that God worked through. We are as well. And then the very next chapter begins to show us the foundation of our part, this idea of worship. And really more than a foundation, because a foundation is a different substance that's what's built on it. This is more like the seed that's planted, and it comes out of that. Our part comes out of worship. And the next few chapters look at it from different angles, from repentance and temptation. And then you get to chapter 4, where you see Jesus doing his part in God's plan, at least starting that. And you see that focus, remember, of shining the light. Making sure that as you do ministry, as you do your part, as you live your life as a disciple, you are shining the light. The focus is on God, because that's the true power. It's not anything that we have in and of ourselves. And so with that done, again, it was still pretty general. Now you say, well, we're finally ready to get to some specifics, right? What is a disciple? In the kingdom of heaven, what are we supposed to do? We're ready for some specifics. But even then, the sermon is all full of specifics. But not yet. The section we're looking at today is the introduction to the sermon. And here Jesus sort of sets the stage a little bit more, and he still makes it clear. There's this underlying element we've got to get before I even get to the specifics. And that's what we're going to see as we look at the Beatitudes and what Jesus has to say about salt and light, and then about the law itself. And this section, this introduction, it raises a question. And I put it there, what does it take for a good deed to be good? What does it take for a good deed to be good? Which if you look at it, the implication is it's possible for a good deed to not be a good thing. It's possible to do a good deed, and that's not a good thing. And I don't know if we've ever thought about that, have we? Like, well, if I do something good, just right away, inherently, it's a good thing. But this section is going to raise the question, no, there has to be something present. And so let's look at it. We're going to look at verses 3 through 12. Jesus said, and he goes on, and again, he's going to start this sermon, this section known as the Beatitudes. And that word Beatitude simply means supremely blessed. And we're going to see why that's appropriate, because they're all going to start with blessed are they. So let's look. Verse 3, it says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So you have these Beatitudes here, and as I looked, and I always like to get some perspective from some commentaries and other scholars, and there are a couple questions that kept coming up over and over about the Beatitudes. The first one was, are these traits that are listed at first, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, things like that, are those requirements to get into the kingdom of heaven, to be saved, or are they traits of people who are in the kingdom of heaven, are saved? And the other question was the blessings then. It says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, they will be comforted, they will be filled, all of those. The question is that something we experience now, or is that something we'll experience later in heaven? And the answer to both of those questions, requirements or traits, and now or heaven, is yes. You might think, well, those aren't yes or no questions, but they should be. At least that people should see it in that light. It reminds me of something one of my professors used to say is very common. He called it the ubiquitous theological demon, the false choice. That you have these things, you say, well, it has to be one or the other, and it's not. Certainly not here. Because in a sense, these are requirements, and we cannot earn salvation, we cannot earn heaven, but there are certainly traits that have to be present for us to accept God's offer of grace, and that's what we're going to see as we look at these. And at the same time, as followers of God, as disciples, these traits are going to characterize our lives more and more as we're a part of that kingdom, as we live our life with God. And at the same time, as it says, will we experience the blessings now or in heaven? Yes. We will begin experiencing them now. We'll experience them fully, completely in heaven. And so both of those are true in both cases. And let's look at them and just see how that does apply specifically. It says in verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, I didn't want to say about this word blessed. It's going to come up. What's it mean, blessed? I'll say this. One thing it doesn't mean is happy, in the sense of what we typically think of happy. I'm just thrilled with everything that's going on in life. That's me. I'm blessed. I'm happy. No, it's deeper than that. It's not an emotional thing. It's an objective judgment. It's saying that, someone would look at you, maybe it's God, maybe it's others, and say, you are blessed. There is something different. There's an impact in your life because of this. Because of this trait, this other thing is true of you. And so that's what blessed is talking about. The first one, it says poor in spirit. And there's another version of this sermon. It's often called the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, because instead of a mountainside, he talks about a plain. And people, all kinds of questions. Are they the exact same one, different one? And I think Jesus, as he went around, he certainly preached, the same things to different groups of people. He was able to do that as he moved around. So he did this more than once. But the difference that comes up in Luke is it simply says, blessed are the poor. Now, the Bible never says that just being poor will bring you spiritual blessings, because there needs to be more than just your physical, financial state. But here's why it can say that in Luke, is because that word poor in the Old Testament had come to mean someone who, because they were poor, because they didn't have a lot of financial things to rely on, material things, they had come to depend on God. And so it had that connotation. The poor were people who depended on God. It's not necessarily true today that if you're poor, you automatically depend on God. But that was true in the Old Testament use. So Luke could say the poor. Matthew amplifies what it means. It's poor in spirit. It's someone who knows that I need God. I need him for my whole life. I certainly need him for this idea of salvation. I need and I rely on God. And that's why it says their blessing is, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. And that's one of those things, again, what's it mean? Is that now? Is it later? And the phrase I love about the kingdom of heaven, it's already but not yet. Are we in the kingdom of heaven? Yes. We are already in the kingdom of heaven, but we're not yet fully in the kingdom of heaven, because there will be something that's definitely different when we get to heaven. But we start experiencing the blessings now. It's what it means to be saved. We are saved. To be in the kingdom of heaven is to be saved. I am forgiven now. Heaven awaits me for sure. There's also this whole section in between that I am experiencing the life of a disciple in the kingdom now. So theirs is the kingdom of heaven, the poor in spirit, people who realize the need for God. Again, that's if you think about it, the foundational requirement for accepting grace is to admit I need grace. I can't do it on my own. But it also then continues our whole life. It's a trait of a disciple, is to realize I can't grow on my own. I can't get through this life on my own. I'm relying on you, God. And we'll experience the blessings of the kingdom more and more as we do that. Verse 4 says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And that raises the question, well, mourn, what's that mean? Is that just anyone who's sad at all? And the context, and a lot of what Jesus says here, there are psalms that lend insight into it. And certainly this one, and I printed it on the outline, Psalm 119, 136, says, "Streams of tears flow from my eyes." Why? Why is he mourning there? "For your law is not obeyed." In other words, he looks out and he sees people are not following God's principles for living, and it grieves him. It saddens him. He's mourning because of that. Well, that's what this is talking about. It's the focus of sin, and specifically, it's not so much my personal sin. That one's going to come later. It's the situations. There's people out there not following God's principles, and because of that, there's suffering that's going on in the world. It shouldn't be like that. God deserves more honor. He should be obeyed, and people shouldn't be experiencing what they are because of that. Well, it says, "Blessed are those who mourn those situations. They'll be comforted." Now, does that mean everything's automatically going to change? No. Often it's comfort amidst the situation. God will show us, and a lot of this is we're going to see as a perspective to know, here I am on earth now, heaven is coming. Verse 5 says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Meek, I always heard it defined, one thing, it's not weak. Sometimes we think that. It's not weakness, but the definition I often heard was strength under control. Like I'm strong, but I'm not just always using that. I think another element that has to come into play here is a true view of yourself and your strength. It's like I honestly know my strength, and in this case, as you think about the kingdom of heaven, I realize there's no strength of mine that can get me in. I can't do anything to achieve it, to earn it. That's the meekness there. It's an honest, realistic view of myself. And then it says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Now, certainly there's the idea of the new earth that's going to come. And you realize when Jesus returns, there's going to be a new heaven and new earth. And we'll be the citizens of that, disciples of his, citizens of the kingdom of heaven. But I think also, again, that it does apply now, in the sense that we are living the life on this earth that's closer, at least. It'll never be exactly what God intended now that sin's entered the picture, but closer than others to the life God intended when he created this earth. Again, the relationship we have with God, that's what God wanted all along. And someone who's meek, someone who realizes I can't achieve that on my own and surrenders to God and his grace is going to experience that. And not just initially to be forgiven, but our whole life. As we continually realize the situations that we're in, I can't do it on my own. God, I need you. Verse 6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Hunger and thirst. What other terms can you use that just get right to the point of this is an essential need? You can't live without food. You can't live without water. It says, view righteousness that way. And the righteousness here is personal righteousness. In this one, as I read, I think there's an element maybe of righteousness and justice. The words mean the same thing, in situations, but the focus seems to be on us. That I want to be like Christ in terms of his obedience, his morality, his faithfulness to God's principles in living. I want that in my life. And it promises us that if we hunger and thirst, if we want it that bad, look what it says, we will be filled. We will be filled. We will get it. It reminded me of something another professor said, and I bring these up at times. I'm so thankful that that you sometimes say, "Oh, Steve, this or that." I'm thankful to the people who mentored me, and so I had a professor who used to say, well, "We will be just as spiritual as we want to be. We will be just as spiritually mature as we want to be." And his point was, it's not some mystery. It's nothing magical that, I'm going to try, but I think there's only this elite group that actually gets it. No, it's open to everyone. We can all be just as spiritual as we want to be. And matter of fact, we are right now. You're just as spiritual as you want to be. And it reminds me of the phrase, when They used to say about football teams, they're better than their record. And Bill Parcells said, no, you are what your record is. That's how good you are. Well, sort of us. We're just as spiritual as we want to be right at this moment. And he based it largely on one of the verses that we talk about a lot, 2 Corinthians 3:18. It says, and we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. That's telling us this is how you mature spiritually. How you become more like Christ is you contemplate his glory. You see it in the Word and you meditate on it. You think about it. And the other legs of the triangle as well. You talk with other Christians about it, about Christ and who he is, and his glory, and about us and our situation. And then that's that other leg, is when we're in these situations, I trust in Christ and his glory, his glorious love, his glorious power, his glorious faithfulness, and I live that out. And as I do all three of those, the Word, relationships with other Christians and situations, I am going to become more righteous. The righteousness I thirst for and hunger for, it's going to happen. I'm going to become more spiritually mature. Well, verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, mercy is withholding punishment that's deserved. It goes hand in hand with grace. Grace is giving favor you don't deserve. Mercy is withholding punishment you do deserve. And so definitely salvation is linked to that. Grace is the fuller idea, but mercy is linked to salvation. And it says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, mercy doesn't earn salvation. Like, okay, I've done it, I've earned it, you have to give it to me, God. But this this beatitude and definitely other things show it's true of a disciple. If I'm someone who has received God's mercy, I'm going to show mercy to other people. And it even goes a step further. We're going to see when we get into chapter 6. It's not just true of us, it's necessary. Matthew chapter 6, verse 15 says, but if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. That's a really sobering verse. If you don't forgive others. Now, are there times when we don't forgive them perfectly? Yeah, and maybe as we become a Christian, it takes us a while to get there. But this is saying that as a disciple who has been forgiven, if you just absolutely refuse to forgive someone else, then you haven't really accepted God's grace yourself. It's not even so much God doesn't give it to you. You haven't accepted it. You've got to forgive. And again, it may be a process that you realize, I've got to forgive. I haven't yet, and I'm working there and there and there. And it will take a while. But to just absolutely refuse, that verse is saying, if you do that, you haven't received God's grace. Verse 8 says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Pure in heart means to have one focus, and of course that focus is on God. And it says there, we'll see God. Obviously that's heaven, but even now, think about it. We will see more clearly who God is as we focus on him and him alone. And it made me think about the Christian life and how, people, and all of us, we have a view of the Christian life. Here's what it is. Here's what it's like. And that verse made me think, our view of the Christian life is as accurate as our pure focus on God. If my focus on God isn't pure, I'm living the Christian life that's a result of that. And so I'm saying this is what the Christian life is like. And I thought about it, well, yeah, but it could be different if my focus were more pure. Then I'd be seeing God a little more clearly, maybe. And so that's one to look at. Again, it's a trait that's necessary to become a believer. It's something I've got to have in order to accept God's grace, but it's also something that grows as I live in that grace. Verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, that idea, children of God, the literal Greek is sons of God, and the NIV expands it because it is true of men and women. But it keys on the ancient concept of sonship. And maybe you've heard me say this before. In the ancient world, in Jesus' time, in Jesus' culture, more emphasis was placed upon a person being like the Father than being the biological child of the Father. A father, a master, oftentimes would adopt a slave who was like him in attitude and spirit and may disown a son who wasn't. That was what was important to them. It was sharing that attitude. Well, look what it's saying here. The people who have this specific attitude, this trait, are peacemakers. They're the ones who are going to be called children of God. And I thought about it. Of all these traits, to say these are the ones that are going to identify the closest with God, it's this one of being a peacemaker, of seeking after unity. And definitely in the Bible, we see this over and over and over. this emphasis on unity, especially as Christians, because if we don't have unity with each other, it's going to totally undermine our influence and our impact on the world. Now, the other thing here, we're to be peacemakers, but it doesn't guarantee that other people are going to treat us the same way, because you look at verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, because of all the things that we do to follow in the image of Christ. It's not just persecuted because you're an unlikable person that you're blessed, but if you are persecuted because you are following God's principles, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, we won't all be persecuted physically, but we will all be persecuted in some way if we are following God's principles. You know, Jesus said this in John 15, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. Not everyone, not every moment, but there will be people that despite the fact you're doing everything that objectively is the best way to live, they're going to find a reason to be against you. Because you're sharing those same traits, you're living those same traits that Christ lived, and they were against him as well. Well, it says, those who are persecuted, blessed are they, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And what it's saying there is that persecution is like a confirmation. You know, they persecuted Christ for his traits, for living this way. As you are persecuted for living that way, it's a confirmation. I'm doing it right. You know, I'm living the life that Christ lived, that he wants me to live. There's an element of that. And then this one, verse 11, expands on it. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. You know, don't you feel blessed when those things happen? Like, well, I had a really blessed day. But again, it's this idea of looking objectively. God is working in that person. There is something that's happening. And it says here, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And there's that idea, it's going to happen. As you follow God, it's always been this way. The righteous people who follow God will be persecuted. Rejoice and be glad, not for being persecuted, but for that blessing. Great is your reward in heaven. And notice there it does say heaven. It's not kingdom of heaven. This is talking about the future eternal reward, and it's putting it in perspective. You know, I don't know what we face here in our persecution. I don't know how long we face it, but we're going to be in heaven in the presence of God for eternity, and it's all going to just fade away. And that's the perspective. You look at those, and you know, the word I wrote down is just wow. Like, this is the life that's possible as a disciple of Christ, a follower, a Christian, a believer. This is what our life can be like. And it's also necessary. This is what my life needs to be like to fully experience that, certainly to come into the kingdom and fully experience it. Well, the Sermon on the Mount, again, it's about this focus on the life in the kingdom of heaven. You know, the life of a disciple. But before Jesus gets to some of the specific actions that you're probably familiar with in the later part of chapter 5 and 6 and on that, you know, things like anger and lust and forgiveness and all that stuff, before he gets there, you have these underlying traits. And I thought about that. Isn't that familiar? Isn't that what we've been seeing up to this point? You know, it talks about worship, and does it talk about the specific actions of worship? No, it's the underlying attitudes. You know, same with repentance, the same with temptation. And I thought this is just continuing that same thing. Before Jesus gets to the specifics, he gives the general principles. And I also thought about how different it is from things today so often. You know, we are just so focused. Maybe it's because we're so pragmatic, we're so impatient. It's like, just tell me what to do. Get it done, check off the list, boom, boom. And that's not what Jesus is doing. Before he gets to those things, and even as he's treating those, it's going to be more foundational and more attitude. But here he makes it clear. It starts with these traits. And then when he gets to the salt and light section, he's going to state why. Here's why it is so important that you have these traits. And so look at verses 13 through 16. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, both of those start off with this phrase, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. And in the Greek, that word is emphatic. It's the idea that you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Each of us individually as disciples in the kingdom. And it goes a little bit against what you might expect, and certainly what Jesus' Jewish audience might expect. It's like, well, the light of the world, well, that's the law. You know, it's just, there's nothing greater than that. The salt of the earth, that's the temple. That's the preeminent thing. And Jesus says, no, you, individually, disciples, you're the salt. And salt, you know, it adds flavor. But the thing it was especially important for in Jesus' day is it preserved things. They didn't have refrigeration. You'd rub it on the meat and it would preserve it and keep it from going bad. And just think of the metaphor there. And light, you know, light was a guide. You needed it to be able to see. And again, we take it for granted because we can flip a switch. But they knew without it, without some way of having light, and they couldn't even really function. You know, what can you do? You know, you can't operate in the dark. And so that's what he's saying. These are essential things to living in Jesus' day and age. But both of them convey the same idea. Did you notice it here? Both of them convey the same idea that in the spiritual application Jesus is talking about, the benefits are not automatic. We're the salt of the earth and we're the light of the world, but there's a chance that as salt we won't really preserve, and there's a chance that as light we won't really guide and illuminate. And he's warning us against that. What's he say here? He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, now real salt cannot lose its saltiness. It's always salt. But in Jesus' day, the way they gathered salt, it was full of some impurities. And so what would happen is you'd have the salt and some of the impurities, and the salt was more soluble. So whatever it was, the humidity or something, would sort of leach the salt away. And so you'd still have this substance that they referred to as salt, but it wasn't as salty as before. It wasn't as concentrated. And so it did lose its saltiness. It was possible for that to happen in his day. And they would be familiar with that. And he asked the question, how can it be made salty again? It can't. There was no way. And they knew that. He didn't have to answer it. He says, then it's good for nothing, no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. It doesn't accomplish what it was meant to. Same thing with light. You are the light of the world. And he approaches this one a little different. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. In that day, again, if there was a town on a hill and the lights that would happen in early evening, there's no way you could hide a town. Well, he's saying in the same way, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. You could do that, but you wouldn't. You wouldn't do that. And we wouldn't do it today. You don't turn on a light and then purposely cover it. And that's what he's talking about. Instead, they put it on a stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. And then look at the point he makes here, verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. I remember every passage, at least, my opinion, has a wait a minute moment. And this one to me is the wait a minute moment. And it's not as direct, it's more the implication. Look what he says. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And that word that means it's possible that this wouldn't happen. If you don't do something, this other won't happen. And it could be one of two things. Either they won't see your good deeds, so they won't glorify God, or they will see your good deeds, and they still won't glorify God. And I think it's the second one. It's not that they won't see your good deeds, but if you're not doing them in such a way, if you're not letting your light shine, and there's that metaphor again of the light and God, if God's not coming through in that, then they'll see your good deeds, but they won't glorify God. It won't be a positive thing. Here's that central question of today. When can good deeds not be a good thing? Well, when they're not done in such a way that they bring glory to God. And the salt metaphor helps a little bit. Again, it's possible for this salt substance that they still have to no longer be salty. They could see the salt, but it's not good. It's not accomplishing what it's supposed to. Well, same thing. People can see our good deeds. They're supposed to glorify God. There's a chance that they won't. If something's not true of them, if something's not present. And the second wait a minute moment, and there's not often a second one, but this one's more for the audience. Verse 16 is us. And we read that and say, wow, it's possible to do good deeds that don't glorify God. But there's another one in this next section of verses that Jesus' audience would have caught. Like, wait a minute. Let's read this. Verses 17 to 20. It says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Then verse 20, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. That was a huge wait a minute moment for Jesus' audience. You know why? You remember, and we looked at this a couple weeks ago, it's in Philippians. You know, what was the opinion? And part of it from it's not a wait a minute moment for us, and we're like, well, of course, the Pharisees were jerks. You know, yeah, definitely your righteousness has to be better than they were. They put Jesus to death. But Jesus' audience, what view did they have of the Pharisees, and especially in terms of righteousness? And Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 3, where he looks back on his life. Remember, Paul was a Pharisee. And he talks about, and he's sort of saying his credentials, if anyone could earn heaven, it'd be me. But he makes a point, there's no way I can. But he lists the things that, you know, from an earthly perspective, someone might think, oh yeah, you should go right to the front of the line. And what he says about himself, remember, is as for righteousness done under the law, I am faultless, I'm blameless. That's the view people had of the Pharisees. When it came to righteousness, Pharisees were blameless. And what did Jesus just say? Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you can't get into heaven. That'd be like saying, unless your basketball skills surpass Michael Jordan's, you're out of luck. Anyone here going to say, yeah, I'll be okay. I'll be able to get by. I can beat Michael Jordan. Yet now, let alone in his prime. That's what he was saying to these people. And they're like, how they're blameless. How can I have righteousness that surpasses them? Whoa, wait a minute, Jesus. Well, he's going to say later on, and we're going to see it in the sermon, you have all these things where they took the very superficial, approach to things like murder and adultery. Well, I've never murdered anyone, I'm okay. And Jesus is going to talk about the heart element that needs to be present too. And at times he's going to talk about the giving. The Pharisees would pray, but they'd pray on the street corner, not to really focus on God, but to have people focus on them. And so it's going to become clear, but we can put it all together here because the introduction of the Sermon on the Mount it establishes this idea. And there's a couple key ideas I want us to take away today. The first one is good deeds must come from a true heart commitment. That's the first thing we see, is when we do good deeds, they have to come from a true heart commitment. And this is the point of Jesus starting out with the Beatitudes. All of these heart traits, poor in spirit, mourn for the sin that is in the world. They're meek. They know their own personal ability, and standing before God. They hunger for righteousness. They're merciful. They're pure in heart. Peacemakers. They have an eternal perspective on persecution. Jesus is saying this has to be true of you before you start even thinking about these specific good deeds I'm going to tell you next. And if they're not, if these things don't come from your heart, you're like salt that has lost its saltiness. You're worthless. Even though you think you've got it all. And that's I've accomplished the goal. I'm doing good deed after good deed after good deed. Jesus says, no, you're unsalty salt. The only thing you're good for is to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Because your good deeds, when he talked about the light, because you do good deeds, and again the Pharisees, they did good deeds, and God wasn't glorified. People didn't look at those Pharisees and say, wow, what a great God we have. They looked at the Pharisees and said, wow, what jerks. And they're the representatives of God. And so it didn't really amplify God at all. And it goes back to it. Same thing we've seen leading up to this in chapters 1 through 4, the focus there. Everything we do has to flow out of worship, out of our focus on God and His worthiness and His grandeur and everything that makes Him God. That's our focus. And then everything we do comes out of that. That makes the things we do truly shine the light, as we saw in chapter 4. That's how you shine the light, is when it comes out of that. And he says the same thing there. Let your light shine in this way. So when you do those good things, people will glorify God. And I thought about this. It is so possible today to do good deeds in a way that doesn't glorify God. And I think the reason is because of today's focus. And I mean that in the church. We put such a focus on doing instead of being. Do this, do this, do this. Here's 7 things to do to be a better father, 7 things to do to be a better giver. All these things are on doing, and those are important, but they have to come out of being. They have to come out of our heart. Not just the actions we do, but what we are in our heart. This past, it's been going on for several weeks, and I don't know if it makes the mainstream media at all. I get some religious, emails with news. A preacher in Seattle, well-known preacher among churches and preachers. Matter of fact, he interviewed the Seattle Seahawks before the Super Bowl last year and had a video that went around, the faith of some of those players. And this man, it's a large church, and he has been just, dedicated to that church. He started another organization called Acts 29 that was all about planning churches to reach more people. He did good deed after good deed after good deed. And last week he resigned from his church under pressure. And it wasn't for a moral failure in the sense of an affair or anything like that. It's because when he did his good deeds, he did them with a bad attitude. He was just known for his anger and just coercing people and being intimidating to people. And he got in trouble for plagiarizing in one of his books and for some trick they did to get it onto the New York Times bestseller list. And all of these things, he was doing good deed after good deed, but his heart was not pure. His heart was not focused on God. And it led to him resigning and God not being glorified in the midst of it all. And it's not just him. It's not just some mega church pastor over in Seattle. I think of some of the times where, at least in my mind, I've had the most negative view of God. If I were to just look objectively, it's when I see Christians doing good things with a bad attitude. I'm like, wow, I don't want to be any part of that, and I am a part of that. I'm already in. I don't want to be. If I wasn't, I don't know if I would be. And so we need to stop and think about that. It's so easy, and in Jesus' day is what was going on, and where he's going to go with some of these, teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. Well, I've never murdered. I'm a pretty good guy. It's like, yeah, but we're not shining the light. We're not glorifying God. And so the first key idea is good deeds must come from a true heart commitment, from these kind of traits that we see in the Beatitudes. But then there's the other side, the other extreme. The second key idea is a true heart commitment will result in good deeds. And this is why Jesus says what he does in verses 17 and following. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but fulfill them. Why would he say do not think? Because he knows it's possible they're thinking that at the moment. And why would they think that he came to abolish the law and the prophets? Well, he's just sort of put good deeds in a perspective that they weren't used to. For them, good deeds, what'd you do today? I did this, 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 and this. And Jesus is saying those good deeds are worthless if you don't have a heart commitment. And he's afraid that human nature will go to the opposite extreme and say, well, then good deeds must not be important. I'm just going to, and Jesus, he must be saying the whole law where it tells you the good deeds to do and the prophet, those aren't important. He says, no, don't think I came to abolish those and get rid of them. Or in fact, he says, I didn't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And that doesn't just mean to obey them. It means through his teaching and his actions to show us what they truly, God intended all along. And also to show us that they pointed to him all along. The law, the prophets, they were all pointing to this special person, the Messiah, the Son of God, who was coming. Jesus says, I'm the fulfillment of that. You'll see what the law was meant to be in me. Verse 18, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, the old King James, jot or tittle, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And it's that idea, jot was a little mark, and they're not sure what the tittle was, but again, one of the smallest letters. It's none of it. Am I just abolishing? Not the least stroke of that will by any means disappear until everything is accomplished. Now, some parts of the law have been set aside, the ceremonial parts, the sacrifices, but they served their purpose. It was accomplished. So Jesus didn't just come and wipe it out. He came and fulfilled it. There's 2 ways. Again, another professor. Thank you. So there's 2 ways to fulfill an engagement. What are they? There are 2 ways to end an engagement. Leave, yeah, not get married. Or get married, yeah. Or, if you're married, are you still engaged? No. Well, Jesus didn't break off the engagement. He fulfilled it. He got married in that sense. He did what it was expected to do all along. And so, yeah, in that sense, there are parts of the law that have now been fulfilled, done. But he didn't just wipe them out and say they weren't important. He did what they were supposed to do. He fulfilled what was supposed to happen. Verse 19, therefore anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's all kinds of things as I read this, great, least, commands. The point is, you get what Jesus is saying, God's principles are important. I haven't come to say they're not important, not by any means. Because think about it, the moral principles of the law, the things like do not steal and do not lie and do not murder, do not commit adultery, all those things, they're based on God's nature. You heard me say before, the law is God's nature put into writing. God is life, so do not murder. God is truth, so do not lie. You can't get rid of those because they're based on God himself, and he doesn't change. And so that's what Jesus is saying. The law, the principles there, they are important. And again, what's the reason for these verses? Think about the Beatitudes. Those are just could stand on their own and just think about those all day. Salt and light, that's pretty important. And then Jesus throws this in before he gets to the rest. And the reason, I think, is it's our tendency to go to extremes. We as humans can do that. We're prone to it. I always tell the story here, my dad, when we were growing up, he worked at Kroger grocery store, and he worked in the meat department. So he worked in like a freezer all day. And he liked it. He was used to that. So whenever our family was in the car, he'd have the air conditioner cranked all the way up. And the rest of us would get cold way before he would, if he ever would. And so we say, Dad, can you turn that down a little? Well, he'd go from the 4 setting down to 1 or maybe even 0. And so you go a little ways, and what happens? Well, then you get hot. And you're like, Dad, can you turn it up a little? And what do? He puts it back on 4. Like, Dad, there's 2 and 3. Right in between there. I don't know what he'd do today with all the infinite little numbers you can go between there. It's like he never knew there was a 2 and 3 setting on the air conditioner. Well, human nature, a lot of times we're like that. We are one extreme or the other. And when it comes to this, one extreme is to do good deeds without the heart. To be so focused on the doing that we think my heart doesn't matter. And again, it's possible, and it's possible by, someone like this preacher in Seattle to do the greatest good deeds and somehow look and say, well, that my heart doesn't matter. It's possible for all of us to do that. But the other extreme is the supposed extreme of I've got the heart without the good deeds. And I say supposed because if you can't really have a heart without good deeds, a heart that's focused on God. James 2:17 says faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Well, the same thing would be true here. Faith is a matter of the heart. We can't say, oh, I'm pure in heart, I'm poor in spirit, and I'm this and that, and not have good deeds that demonstrate it. If we truly are pure in heart, if we truly are poor in spirit, and all of those things, there will be good deeds. And so if you're not seeing them, don't kid yourself to think, I'm really pure in heart. I've got the attitudes down. My heart's in the right place. If your heart's in the right place, the actions will follow. Worship, our heart and our faith, they'll result in good deeds. Matter of fact, they'll result in more good deeds when you do them out of a heart that's committed to God than when you do them out of a sense of guilt or personal accomplishment or I want people to see me. Well, verse 20 then, the last one in this section, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. You won't be saved unless your righteousness surpasses them. And it doesn't mean you have to be better in the sense of, higher on the scale. It means a righteousness that's different, that comes from a heart commitment to God, which is what it means to accept grace in my heart. And this is a transitional statement and a summary. Good deeds must come from the heart, but also the idea that you're not going to surpass those Pharisees if you have no good deeds. A little musical accompaniment. Yeah, you can't say, oh, my righteousness is greater than theirs if you don't do any good deeds at all. The balance has to be in place. Come from the heart, doing good deeds. Well, what do I need to do? How do I take this home? And I listed a few things. First of all, ask yourself, which extreme am I more prone to? And I think each of us, by our personality and our nature, might be more prone to I focus on the good deeds and I sort of say, well, the heart doesn't matter because I'm doing all these things. Or maybe you say, well, I've got the heart. That's what's important. And we don't really stop to see if there's some good deeds flowing from our supposed heart. And maybe it's in situation by situation or area or place or time of life. I don't know, but ask yourself, which am I more prone to? To focus on the good deeds and maybe ignore the heart, or focus on the heart and ignore the good deeds? And then second, consider that when you're studying Bible passages. As you look at those, chances are you're going to gravitate. Oh, this says, this, and you're going to apply it maybe to the heart and not think about, here's what I need to do in life. Or you're going to see it and say, oh, I need to do this, this, and this, and overlook what it's saying about some of the underlying attitudes that need to be present as you're doing those good deeds. Or you're going to have a negative witness instead of a positive witness. And then the last thing, and I'm seeing this more and more, it's just true, you need to discuss it with other disciples. This is the kind of thing that you need a little processing. And so talk about it with people. Talk about the specifics of the sermon or other things you read or whatever it is as you're with some other disciples, either from our church or wherever it is. Talk about these things and just try to help see it come along. And when we do that, what will it look like? I go back to verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. That's the essence of discipleship. Discipleship is us imitating God and Christ in a way that impacts others. I live a life like His life, and as I do, it impacts others. Now, sometimes I have to actually speak to them. Sometimes it's just they see these things, and it impacts them. The key goes back to worship. It says there, let your light shine, that heart attitude, that focus on God. And when you do that, people will glorify your Father. And glorify and worship are the same thing. And so that's saying our worship leads to good deeds that leads other people to worship. That's the process. My worship of God, and again, not just the specific actions, that underlying attitude, my worship leads to me doing good deeds in such a way that it leads to other people worshiping God, recognizing and realizing His worth and who He is, why He's different, why He's important. Well, I want to close with a question again. I've enjoyed these times where we sort of start the process, and you'll see there's a for later statement because we can't get everything now. It's going to hopefully come to you as we go. But for now, just to take a few minutes, what are the factors that lead us to focusing more on doing versus being? What are the effects of focusing more on doing versus being? And how can we change? So just give some thought to that. What are the things in our culture, in our life, in your personality that lead us, if you agree that's true, to focus more on doing than being? What are the effects of doing that, and then how can we change?